Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lynn. If not, welcome back. For today's video, we're going to be talking about self-watering pots. So if that sounds exciting, keep on watching. So this was a video that was specifically requested by one of my subscribers on my YouTube community page. If you haven't been to my YouTube community page, go check it out. It's on my YouTube channel page and you click community. And over there, you can share pictures with me. You can share pictures of your new plant purchases, or if you have any planty questions that you want to post to the community, or if you just want to say hi, you can leave a message there. Basically, it's a forum and a bulletin board. And yeah, I welcome you to leave a message or to share pictures of your plants or whatever you want, really. Just stick to the community guidelines and be nice to everybody. Sorry, I see some random spider webs. My house is getting so spidery recently. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about self-watering pots, my pros and cons, my recommendations for how to make them work for you. Because honestly, self-watering pots, I feel, have been marketed in a way that I don't think it's deceitful, but it can be a little bit misguiding, I think, for complete Hoya beginners, especially because self-watering pots, I feel, are actually pretty advanced. Like, you do need quite a little bit of planty know-how and some planty instincts before you get into self-watering pots. I don't think they're good for every single Hoya, and I also don't think they're good for every single grower. So I will be diving deep into all of my thoughts and recommendations for being successful in self-watering pots in this video. So let's get started. I'm gonna move the plants away a little bit. So this is a Hoya Crassipediolata Splash, a beautiful Hoya, extremely fast growing, extremely splashy, has beautiful leaves and beautiful venation. I would highly recommend this Hoya if you're brand new to Hoyas because it's cheap, it's affordable. You can find it quite easily at Walmart or Ace Hardware or Lowe's. Not all the time, sometimes it rotates through, but you can definitely find this in like a nursery or a big box store if you're lucky. So this is a really fun one to collect. If not, if you're in like an area with other Hoya collectors, I am pretty sure somebody is going to have a Hoya Crassipediolata Splash. So yeah, this is a great one. And before I move this one away, I think you can probably guess by now, this is a Hoya Carnosa Crimson Princess. So it's the Carnosa with the inner variegation. I have a beautiful specimen over here. I think sometimes when I look at some Crimson Princesses online, the variegation is not quite as deep and just not quite as striking. I think for a nice Hoya Crimson Princess mother plant, you do need like extremely deep inner variegation. So my hot tip when you go out and buy your Hoya Crimson Princesses is to look for a cutting or like a pot of plants with a really nice deep variegation. If you have bright pink stems, as you can see over here, you have bright pink stems, they usually end up being very nice and variegated. So look for those bright pink stems and for like a nice pair of high variegation leaves. So I'm gonna move this to the side so that we can like talk. So before I get into like my pros and cons when it comes to self-watering pots, I do want to give out a few disclaimers. And I know some of you really hate disclaimers, but I have to say them because we have such a big mix of growers who are watching this channel right now, like from extremely experienced growers to really novice growers. And I need to give disclaimers to help the novice growers who might not understand that all of the suggestions come with a lot of nuance. Okay, so here are my disclaimers. I use all kinds of pots in my collection. I have clear pots. I have pots with loose chunky soil mix. I have self-watering pots in a semi-hydro setup. I have self-watering pots in loose chunky soil mix. And basically I have pots, I have plants that are growing in plastic pots. I have plants that are growing in glass containers. I have plants that are growing in terracotta pots. My point is I grow all of my plants in a very non-homogeneous way is what I'm trying to say. I don't grow all of my plants in self-watering pots. I don't grow all of my plants in semi-hydro. I also don't grow all of my plants in loose chunky soil mix. And I also don't grow all of my plants in a clear plastic pot. That's what I'm trying to say. All of those methods work. I don't think there's one method that's more superior than another. You can grow out your entire plant journey with just loose chunky soil mix and clear plastic pots and you're going to be a happy clam. And at the same time, if you don't want to do that, you want to do only semi-hydro, you can 100% just do semi-hydro for your entire plant journey, and your plants are also going to be very happy. And the same thing applies to the different pots. So that is the first disclaimer. I think all of the methods work. What makes the biggest difference is A, your environment, and B, your growing habits, your watering habits, and your experience as a grower. Those things are going to impact the combination of pots and medium more, I feel, than anything. So that's the first disclaimer. All of those things work. I don't think one is more superior than the other. However, I did release a recent video talking about some Hoyas that did seem to prefer semi-hydro or loose chunky soil mix over the other medium. But again, it doesn't mean that they don't grow. They just seem to grow a little bit faster in a specific medium. So if you don't want to do loose chunky soil mix, you don't have to. If you don't want to do semi-hydro, you don't have to. The plants are going to do just fine. The real X factor is your environment and you. So obviously, self-watering pots can be applied in a variety of ways. You can apply them with leca. So you can apply them in a semi-hydro setup with leca, with pond, with a mixture of leca and pond, with your homemade bonsai rocks. All kinds of different semi-hydro substrates out there right now, and you can do them in any of those combinations. At the same time, you can also do semi-hydro in a loose chunky soil mix, which is what I have here. So both of these Hoyas on the table that I wanted to show you right now in loose chunky soil mix in a self-watering pot. This is a wicking system with a rope down into the watering chamber, and this is how both of these Hoyas have been growing for the last couple of years. They've been in these pots. These are like 4-inch self-watering pots, and they've been in here for like years. And as you can see, they're very happy. They're growing really well. But at the same time, I grow a ton of other Hoyas in a ton of other substrates and different pot setups, and they also grow really well. So self-watering pots are not superior in any way, my humble opinion. I know some of you might feel very strongly about that. So those are my disclaimers, and now I'm going to get into I think I have 5. Yeah, my 5 pros and 5 cons of self-watering pots. Pro number 1. So every pro I give, I'm going to give you a con. So pro number 1, I do think that Hoyas do enjoy a self-watering pot setup if you water properly. And I say this with a big if, and I'm gonna leave my instructions to the end of this video and timestamp it, because for now I want to focus on the pros and cons for those people who are already experienced and they just kind of want a quick rundown. But Hoyas do like a self-watering pot, especially if you know how to care for Hoyas in a self-watering pot. So that's pro number 1. Con number 1, some Hoyas do genuinely seem to hate a self-watering pot. There are some Hoyas, especially very succulent, thick-leaved Hoyas. They don't seem to enjoy a self-watering pot as much as a finer leaf Hoya, in my opinion. Like I would say the Hoya carnosa has pretty chunky leaves, but not like extremely thick and succulent like the SR 2007-13 Loe province. So there are some Hoyas, I think most Hoyas can survive pretty well in the self-watering pots, but I have had a few Hoyas just absolutely hate a self-watering pot and a self-watering pot setup because their feet are always wet. And you're going to hear this a lot, like feet are wet. That just means that the bottom of the pot is always saturated with moisture, and some Hoyas just do not like that. I find that self-watering pots work extremely well for finer leaf Hoyas, for Hoyas that are of like a medium texture. They seem to enjoy self-watering pots a lot because they tend to be wetter down the bottom. But not all Hoyas that have very succulent leaves tend to enjoy self-watering pots. I'll give you an example. Like, it's not that it's impossible to grow a Hoya obovata in a self-watering pot. I bet a ton of you have beautiful Hoya obovata mother plants in self-watering pots. But I will say this, my Hoya obovata in a self-watering semi-hydro setup is not as happy or as fast growing or as fast blooming as my Hoya obovata mother plant that's in a full loose chunky soil mix. So that's my observation. The second pro of a self-watering pot is the fact that the chamber is so easy to see. You can just look right through and know when you need to water the chamber. I think because of this, a lot of beginner Hoya growers, or maybe even experienced Hoya growers, look to a self-watering pot and go, this is so much easier than trying to lift up a pot and figure out whether it's light or not and whether I need to water it or not. So this feels, I think, in the beginning, like a more obvious, easier watering method than just using a regular pot. So I think that the second pro of a self-watering pot is the fact that it's so easy to look into the chamber and know when it's dry, compared to like a regular soil mix in a pot that like you just have to pick up and fill, or like put a moisture meter in and test it for its wetness. Accompanying that pro is my second con. My second con is that just because the chamber is dry doesn't mean the soil inside is dry. For example, I just watered this Hoya 2 days ago, and this chamber is completely dry. But I can promise you, holding this plant in my hand, it has heft, it's heavy, the soil inside here is fully saturated, it is wet. I think what happens with a lot of growers or plant parents who are new to self-watering pots is what happens is they look at this and they go, oh, it's dry. I just watered it 2 days ago, but it's dry. I'm gonna add more water into it. And then you keep leaving water in the chamber at all times. And that is how you rot a Hoya. So when you rot a Hoya, or you have been rotting Hoyas in self-watering pots, it's not because the pot is bad or the setup is bad. It's more because you need to adapt your watering habits when you're using a self-watering pot. They don't quite work the same way. So just watered this 2 days ago, but the chamber is completely dry, but the soil is saturated because all of the water in the chamber has been absorbed into the soil. And the soil is now holding all of the moisture and it's slowly releasing it into the roots of the plant. So this doesn't need to be watered for at least another 10 days. But if I were to keep adding water in here every 2 days, this plant is going to rot. So that is the second con. Like, I know the chamber makes it feel like it's easier to see so you know when to water, but it's not quite so simple. The third pro with using a self-watering pot is the fact that in general, you'll have less gnats in the house. So gnats usually lay their eggs at the surface of the soil when it's wet and moist and, dark. So a lot of the larvae and the eggs tend to grow in the surface of the soil. So when you have a self-watering pot, because the water is coming from down below, the top, like I want to say half an inch to an inch, is usually pretty dry. It doesn't get super wet. And it stays pretty dry. Because of that, your gnat population tends to go down. However, if you're constantly adding water into the chamber, you're going to completely saturate the soil, and then the gnat problem will be the same. Basically, it'll be the same. So following the third pro is my third con. Yes, there will be less gnats, but here's the other problem. Your roots, because you're seeking water down in the bottom, and because the soil is mostly wet from here, and then it gets drier and drier and drier as it goes back up, most of your roots are going to be concentrated down the bottom half of the pot, and they're going to be completely root bound here or around here, or they're going to grow directly into the watering chamber. You're not going to get such a nice even distribution of roots as you normally would in a traditional plant pot setup where you water top down from the entirety of the pot, because there's moisture throughout the entire medium, so the roots can grow in every direction. So when you repot, you usually get like a really nice park of roots that grow out and cover the entire container. But if you have grown a Hoya in a self-watering pot for long enough, you will know when you repot this Hoya, most of the roots are going to be down here and also in the watering chamber. And all of the roots that are in the watering chamber are literally attached to the string down here. You're going to have to sacrifice, because there's just no way you can repot this unless you want to like somehow strip out. Yeah, that's just no way. You're going to have to sacrifice the roots in the chamber. So that is a con for me. Anytime you don't, or rather anytime you can do as little as humanly possible to damage the roots of your Hoyas during repotting, the less likely you're going to get a reaction from the plant. Like, or if all you do is just unpot something from one pot and then put it into another pot and add more soil, your plant is almost never going to stall and almost never going to freak out, and they're just going to be like, "Boop, new home." And they're just going to keep growing. But every time I have had to unpot a Hoya from a self-watering pot and mess with its roots, tear out all the bottom roots and all of those things, they do tend to stall for a bit because you've basically just removed maybe 30% of their roots or 40% of their roots, and they now go into recovery mode. They're trying to get back the original root density to support all of this foliage. So just beware. Just know that when you get a self-watering pot, yes, you'll get lesser gnats because the moisture is all down to the bottom, but your roots are also going to slowly go down into the watering chamber and all of that kind of stuff. So you're going to almost have to rip roots when you're repotting self-watering pots. So that is the third con. The fourth pro. A self-watering pot is completely self-contained. Like, you don't need a saucer. There's no secondary piece. It is all just one piece. It's usually connected by a screw in or like a click in, and it's very nice and minimalistic, and I think aesthetically very pleasing because everything is just together. You don't have to deal with like a saucer and then like a cash pole and all that kind of stuff. There are like 3 parts to that traditional setup, right? You have a plastic pot, and then you have a cash pole if you want a cash pole. A cash pole is just like an additional outer decorative pot. And then you need a saucer. So all of those things kind of like go away when you get a self-watering pot because all you need is just the self-watering pot. It's everything. You don't need a saucer because the chamber is attached to the pot. So I think that's a pretty big pro because you don't have to go around hunting for saucers. So with that pro comes my con. One thing I don't like about self-watering pots is the fact that it takes up a lot of vertical height. So this over here, I would say is about 2 to 3 inches of space for the watering chamber. And that just means that your Hoya now has 2 to 3 inches less space to grow in the shelf that you have them in. So whatever shelf that you're growing them in, you've just sacrificed 2 to 3 inches just so you can have a watering chamber. And if that's an okay sacrifice for you, go ahead, no problems. But personally, because of how tall the watering chambers usually are, and again, you can buy like shorter watering chambers, but then that just means that sometimes the Hoyas don't get enough water, and that's a different problem. There are so many different self-watering pot designs on the market right now, but no matter what self-watering pot you get, whether it's a shallow one or a deep one like this one, you're going to sacrifice some head space. And that space, if you're growing your Hoyas in a window, doesn't matter, but if you're growing your Hoyas on the shelf, then yeah, a lot of these Hoyas that you put into a self-watering pot are not going to fit on the shelves, especially if you have like a regular 12 to 16 inch trellis. So like not the most space efficient setup, in my opinion. My very last pro, so pro number 5, I kind of already talked about it. It just looks good. You don't need a cash pole. You don't need anything else. It just looks good on its own. I think aesthetically, it's very pleasing. There are so many different designs on the market, and you don't have to like just go with a boring clear plastic pot. And that brings me to my very last con. Self-watering pots are expensive. I think personally, personally, I don't care if I look at my collection and I see a clear pot with bare soil. Like, that's not an ick for me. But I do know a friend who likes all of her Hoyas in a very nice decorative pot. And if you're one of those people, those pots are very expensive, and they can cost a lot more than a self-watering pot. So if you're one of those people who wants to grow your Hoyas in a clear plastic pot so you can monitor what's going on under the soil level, but you don't like the sight of soil, and so you go out to buy a cash pole, and let's say your cash pole has like a hole, and so you need to go get a saucer, then that entire setup is going to cost way more than one self-watering pot. But personally, as if you have been watching my channel for a long time, you know that I grow everything in a clear plastic pot, or sometimes in a recycled glass container, or sometimes in a recycled beer pint plastic container. All of that is to say, I don't care. I don't have that ick when it comes to looking at soil. In fact, I prefer it because when I walk by, I can just go, ooh, root lily, or like, ooh, something wrong with the soil, or ooh, it's still very wet, or like, ooh, that's looking very dry. I don't care. It's not an ick for me, but it can be an ick for some people who have more of like an interior design gene than I do. I just don't. It doesn't bother me. So because of that, one clear plastic pot with a saucer attached on Amazon is like maybe 50 cents, or like maybe $1, or maybe at most $2. Depends on what quality you're like shooting for. So that's gonna be way cheaper than the self-watering pot. And you guys, this self-watering pot was still pretty cheap on Amazon on like a time limited deal. But here's the other con. It's an opaque pot. I can't look into it. It's not clear. I don't know what's going on in there, and I'm too lazy to go figure it out. So if the plant doesn't show signs of distress, I'm never going to open this up, and I don't like that. I don't like an opaque pot. But yeah, it's more expensive. It's usually, and that's a weird thing, like self-voiding pots are usually opaque. And those that are clear, and there are so many designs, I don't have them anymore because I've either thrown them away or given them away. But I'll include some screenshots on the screen. Some of these designs don't use a wicking system, or rather they just have feet that go directly into the water chamber. I hate those the most. Like, I have had so many plants, like not just Hoyas, but aeroids too, that have died in those pots because the soil gets so wet. And not just that, the soil starts to, your medium starts to leak out of those feet. I really, really dislike those pots. I know some people have great success with those pots, good for you. I genuinely don't have good success with those pots, and I will not recommend them. But they are clear, which is nice for a self-watering pot. Other self-watering pots with a clear internal pot, like a cash bowl, those pots are nice, they grow really well, but here's my problem. The internal plastic pot is so short. Like, it's not deep enough, and it doesn't hold enough medium. It's so short. Like, most of the container is just the watering chamber. Again, like, it's just so much vertical space, I think. Now that I've given you my 5 pros and 5 cons, I think you can probably hear from what I'm trying to tell you where I personally lean on the self-watering pot conversation. I am personally not a huge fan of self-watering pots anymore. I think back in the day I was, but now not really. I have kind of gone back to the basics. I prefer a clear, simple plastic pot now. I think self-watering pots are really nice if you know how to manage them. I think there is actually quite a lot of margin for error in a self-watering pot than in a traditional pot, personally. And I also don't like how much space it takes up vertically, and I also don't like the cost of self-watering pots. Especially when you need to get bigger self-watering pots, they escalate in price. Like, they're so expensive. So self-watering pots are not my preferred. I still have some plants in self-watering pots, obviously, because these are legacy plants from back when I decided to try self-watering pots. But I personally don't own any more new self-watering pots, and I don't plan to put any more of my plants in self-watering pots. But that's just me. I know a ton of really experienced Hoya growers who would die by their self-watering pots. They love their self-watering pots, and that's fine. Everybody has their preferred way of growing their plants, so you do you. Alright, so we've talked so much about what I think is good with self-watering pots, where I think self-watering pots are less of a good thing and more of a hassle. And now I want to talk to you about my recommendations for how to manage a plant in a self-watering pot in my experience. My experience could be different from your experience. My growing conditions are different from your growing conditions. My medium might be different. My personality, my watering habits, all of those things are going to be different. So keep that in mind. My self-watering pot plants all have a loose chunky soil mix, and my loose chunky soil mix recipe is on my channel. So feel free to go look at my soy mix recipe. You can just search like soy mix recipe plant ooh la la and you will find it, or you can go to my channel, go to the Hoya tutorial playlist, and you can also find my soy mix recipe there. So this Hoya is in the exact soy mix recipe that I have on my channel. It is in a self-watering pot. This is an opaque pot with an attached chamber. I water directly into the chamber. This one I just watered, I think, yesterday. So I added water up to here and it's already drank about halfway. This is my top tip number 1. Every watering chamber volume is going to be different from not plant to plant, but from pot to pot. So depending on what self-watering pot you have bought and what design it has, the volume of the watering chamber is going to be different. One thing I will say for sure is I do not recommend watering all the way to the top. Like, that is a surefire way to rot your Hoyas. In general, I find that in most self-watering pots in the chamber, if you have a really deep chamber like this one, about halfway is more than enough water for the Hoya. And if you have a very shallow one, so let's say you have a shallower, I have one that's in the back, but it's really hard to get out, so I'm not going to get it out. But I have another self-watering pot that's in a chamber that's about half of this height. For that one, I water it all the way, but at the end of the day, you'll see that it's still about the same amount of water. So tip number 1 is to not overwater your plants when you're in a self-watering pot. And with that, tip number 2 is to make sure that you don't keep adding water into the plant every time you see into the pot every time you see a dry watering chamber. Just because it's dry doesn't mean the soil is dry. So the second tip has to do with using a moisture meter or using a wooden stick to figure out if the soil inside of the self-watering pot is actually dry. So before you figure out how long your plant takes to dry out in summer, spring, during the active growing season, and then the non-active growing season, you might have to rely on a moisture meter or a dry chopstick or a dry wooden kebab stick, whatever you want, whatever you prefer. Stick it into the soil, or like you can stick your finger into the soil. If it feels wet or your moisture meter is reading really high, the soil is still saturated even though the chamber is dry, and that means you need to let the soil dry out before your next watering. So recap, tip number 1, I never ever water all the way up, especially if the chamber is really, really deep because of the volume. Tip number 2, just because the chamber is dry doesn't mean the soil is dry. So when you look at the chamber and it's dry, before you think about adding more water, use a moisture meter, use your fingers, or use a dry wooden kebab stick or a chopstick, stick it into the soil, and then check the soil for moisture. If it's still super wet, don't water it just yet. Let the plant continue drinking from the saturated soil. Let it dry out before watering again. For reference, I water this plant probably once every 10 to 14 days. I add water about halfway up. It drinks it all within 2 to 3 days, and then I leave it alone. Completely dry down in the chamber, but still moist in the soil for another 10 days so that it completely finishes. It's like probably, I want to say 30% dry before I add more water into the chamber. And here's going to be a really common FAQ or commonly asked question that will pop up in the comments. You're going to ask, hey, you have so many roots down here and there's literally water touching those roots. Why are these roots not rotting? These roots are not rotting just yet. It doesn't mean they will never rot. Sometimes some Hoyas can tolerate quite a lot of moisture on their roots. And in this case, because this chamber is a completely open chamber, water is not the direct cause of root rot. Water is an indirect cause of root rot. The real cause of root rot is a lack of oxygen. So over here is a chamber of air. You have water touching the roots, but it's a chamber of air. The roots are actually pretty well oxygenated. However, once you have an extremely root-bound plant in the watering chamber and the roots start to get suffocated, that's when you start getting yellowing leaves, slowed growth, stalk growth, and that's when you will need to repot your plant in a self-watering pot. And all the roots that are in the chamber are probably going to be rotted anyway, so you're going to have to chop off all these roots, let the plant callus, and then repot it back again into a different self-watering pot if that is your preference. My final tip when it comes to using a self-watering pot, if you can buy, again, there are so many different designs of self-watering pots on the market right now, but if you can buy one that is clear, it will make your life so much easier. If you can buy one that is clear, you can very easily just pick up the plant and look at the soil and see if it's dry or if it's still super wet, or if there's an early sign of root rot. All of those things, having a clear pot will help make you a better grower because you can see what's going on in the soil and you can troubleshoot those things immediately. You'll know when to water in the watering chamber, when to it looks pretty wet, I'm gonna wait a couple more days, and all of those things. So my third tip is to buy a self-watering pot that comes with a clear pot inside, or that is clear on the outside too, so you can actually see what's going on. And my final self-watering pot tip is, honestly, I cannot recommend this enough. Go get a self-watering pot that uses a wicking system. Again, I'm just one person. It's n=1. So go listen to other plant people online, or talk to your plant friends in your community, or try it out yourself. Honestly, just go experiment on your own. But I will not recommend self-watering pots with those little feet that go directly into the water, especially if you're growing in loose, chunky soil mix. I think that method still works with a semi-hydro pond or a setup. But in a loose, chunky soil mix setup, that sort of self-watering pot is just really incompatible. Like the soil is constantly wet, it's completely wet all the time, and every time you add more water into the chamber, the soil just leaches out of the little holes in the feet. So I will not recommend buying those self-watering pots with the feet that go directly into the chamber, because the soil just starts leaking out of the holes, and I have rotted so many Hoyas in those self-watering pots that I will never ever recommend them to anybody else. But these, the standard self-watering pots with like a cotton weight inside, I do recommend. I think they are not as prone to root rot as the other one. And I do think you can have quite a lot of success with this self-watering pot in both semi-hydro and in a loose chunky soil mix. But again, just be very, 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 very careful with the frequency in which you're watering your plants, because now that you're no longer top watering, you're bottom watering, you do need to keep an eye out for like the weight of the pot. Like, is it hollow? If it's hollow, it's time to water. And if you haven't developed those sensors just yet, then you really need to pay attention to using a moisture meter, your finger, or like a wooden dry chopstick or kebab stick to understand what's going on with your plant before you add more water. And that brings me to the end of today's video. It's very long, but I hope that this deep dive into self-watering pots, again, my personal opinion, could be different from yours and could be different from your experience. And if it's different, please comment down below and let us learn from your experience. So you can share your experience on the comments down below, or you can share your experience on my community page on YouTube. But yeah, just comment down below. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know whether you've had success with self-watering pots, or whether you have just like hated them from the start, or like just comment down below. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope today's video has been helpful for you. Again, I grow my Hoyas in all kinds of mediums, so I can tell you and reassure you that Hoyas are going to grow in all of those mediums, in all of those setups. What really, really, really matters is your environment and your growing habits. I will include my growing conditions down in the description box below, so if you're interested, go look down below. And I think that brings me to the end of today's video. So thank you again for your attention. Like, comment, and subscribe as always, and goodbye.